I spent 9 years waiting for you to see me. I will not spend the 10th disappearing. Claire Bennett placed the small brass key on the Alpha King's desk, and the quiet click against polished oak seemed louder than the winter storm beyond the palace windows. Ethan Blackwood lifted his gaze from the council papers before him, his silver-gray eyes sharpening with the same authority that had silenced armies and noble courts. Tonight, however, Claire did not lower her head. She stood 6 feet away in the plain blue dress she had worn through nearly a decade of service, her hands folded at her waist so he would not notice how badly they trembled. Beyond the glass, Blackwood Palace glowed beneath a white sky, every tower bright with preparations for the Luna ceremony 6 days away. You are leaving tonight? Ethan asked. His voice was calm, almost too calm, but disbelief moved beneath it like a crack under frozen water. Claire looked at the resignation letter beside the key. Yes, Your Majesty. The title tasted colder than the snow gathering on the stone balconies outside. Ethan read the letter again, as though different words might appear if he stared long enough. You have served this palace since you were 18. I remember. She remembered everything. She remembered the first night she had found him awake beside a dying fire, his hands shaking after the war though he had ordered everyone to believe he felt no fear. She remembered learning which herbs eased the pain behind his eyes, which tea calmed his restless wolf, and which silences meant he needed someone nearby even when he refused to ask. For 9 years, Claire had appeared before every summons and often before he realized he needed her. She had prepared medicines before sunrise, prepared reports before council meetings, and waited outside his chamber through long winter nights when old memories would not let him sleep. Ethan had come to depend on her the way a man depended on warmth, light, and breath. Constantly, unconsciously, without ever looking closely enough to understand what it cost. Earlier that evening, Claire had stood near the back of the royal ballroom while Ethan celebrated the 9th year of his reign. Beneath crystal chandeliers and silver banners, he thanked his commanders, advisors, healers, and ministers. He praised Grant Mercer for developing the moonroot remedy Claire had created in secret. He honored men whose victories had been built on plans she had corrected after midnight. Her name was never spoken. Then Ethan announced that Victoria Caldwell would arrive in 3 days to begin the formal selection that could make her his Luna. The ballroom erupted in applause. Claire had remained still until Ethan approached her afterward and handed her a list of preparations for Victoria's rooms. White roses, silver linens. A fire kept warm through the night. He had thanked Claire with polite affection, the way a king thanked a faithful servant. Something inside her had not shattered. It had simply gone quiet. Now Ethan rose from his chair, tall and controlled, the black fabric of his coat catching the firelight. Take a week away from court, he said. You are exhausted. We will discuss this after the ceremony. There is nothing left to discuss. His expression changed by the smallest degree. Claire saw the first fracture in his certainty. You are important here, he said. Her heart tightened, but she forced herself to meet his eyes. Important is not the same as loved. The words hung between them. Ethan said nothing. Claire turned toward the door, every step heavier than the one before it. Some foolish part of her still waited for him to cross the room, call her by her name, and finally say the one thing she had spent 9 years hoping to hear. Her fingers closed around the handle. Behind her, the silence stretched. Ethan did not follow. Claire opened the door, stepped into the cold corridor, and walked away from the only man she had ever loved. Claire did not look back until the palace doors closed behind her. The corridor beyond them had always felt familiar, with its pale stone walls, brass lamps, and tall windows facing the snow-covered gardens. Tonight, it felt like a place that had already forgotten her. She walked toward the servants' wing at an even pace, though each breath seemed to scrape against her chest. No one stopped her. A pair of guards nodded as she passed. A maid hurried by carrying folded white linens for Victoria Caldwell's rooms. Somewhere above, musicians were still rehearsing for the Luna ceremony 6 days away. The palace continued moving as though Claire had not just torn herself out of its heart. Her room was small, barely 10 feet wide, but every corner held a piece of the life she had built around Ethan. A shelf of dried herbs stood beside the window. A chipped porcelain cup rested near the wash basin. On the narrow desk lay 9 bundles of letters tied with blue ribbon, one for each year she had loved him without saying so. Claire touched the oldest bundle first. The paper had yellowed at the edges. She had written that letter after the winter Ethan returned from war, when he had fallen asleep in a chair beside the fire and whispered her name without waking. She had believed it meant something. The second bundle held a letter written after she created the first moonroot remedy. Ethan had awakened free of pain for the first time in months and thanked Grant Mercer before the entire council. Claire had stood quietly near the wall while Grant accepted the praise with a gracious smile. She had told herself that Ethan's recovery mattered more than recognition. That had become her favorite lie. She opened the wardrobe and removed 2 dresses, a wool coat, and the silver pendant that had belonged to her mother. Everything else could remain. The palace had given her a room, a title, and a place close enough to witness Ethan's life. It had never given her a place within it. A soft knock came at the door. Abigail Moore entered without waiting, her white hair braided over one shoulder and worry filling her kind brown eyes. "So it is true," the healer said. Claire folded the coat into her travel bag. "I leave before dawn." Abigail glanced at the letters. "Does he know what you gave him?" "He knows I made his tea." "That is not what I asked." Claire's fingers tightened around the fabric. Abigail knew about the sleepless nights, the hidden formulas, and the pale silver scars across Claire's palms where healing magic had taken more than it returned. "No," Claire said. "He does not." "No." "Then tell him." Claire looked toward the ceiling, where the king's chambers waited 2 floors above. "I wanted him to notice without being told." The truth left a hollow ache behind. Abigail crossed the room and pressed a small leather pouch into Claire's hand. Inside were 20 gold coins, a map leading south to Willow Creek, and a sealed letter confirming Claire's training and 9 years of service as a healer. "There are people there who need you," Abigail said. "People who will know your worth." After Abigail left, Claire carried the letters to the fireplace. She removed the ribbon from each bundle and fed the pages into the flame one by one. 9 years of hope curled into ash. The final letter burned more slowly than the others. Claire watched Ethan's name disappear in the orange light, then closed her travel bag and whispered, "You will never read what you refuse to see." Before dawn, Claire carried her travel bag through the eastern gate, while snow drifted across the courtyard in pale ribbons. The palace towers rose behind her, dark against the fading night, every window familiar enough to hurt. She had crossed this courtyard thousands of times with medicine, reports, and messages pressed against her chest. She had always been going toward Ethan. This was the first time she was walking away. Thomas, the youngest guard on duty, stepped from beneath the stone arch and stared at the bag in her hand. "Miss Bennet, is the king expecting you to leave?" Claire pulled her wool coat tighter around her shoulders. No, his expression grew uncertain. Should someone wake him? For one dangerous moment, hope stirred inside her. She imagined Thomas running upstairs, imagined Ethan hearing that she had reached the gate, imagined hurried footsteps following her through the snow. Then she remembered the silence behind her when she had opened his study door. "He has had 9 years to notice," she said softly. "Do not disturb him now." Thomas lowered his eyes and opened the gate. Claire stepped beyond the palace walls as the first gray light touched the horizon. A hired wagon waited beside the road, its driver wrapped in a heavy brown coat. Willow Creek lay, nearly 20 miles south, beyond the royal forest and the frozen ridge. The ride was slow, and the cold settled into Claire's fingers despite her gloves. She watched Blackwood Palace grow smaller until the trees finally hid it from view. She expected freedom to feel bright. Instead, it felt quiet, fragile, and unfamiliar. Near midday, the driver stopped beside an abandoned toll house. A small figure stood beneath its broken roof, shivering in a thin green cloak. Claire climbed down before the wagon had fully stopped. The child could not have been older than 10. Her pale face was streaked with tears, and a cloth bundle rested at her feet. "What is your name?" Claire asked, kneeling several feet away so she would not frighten her. "Molly Hayes." "Where is your family, Molly?" The girl looked toward the northern road. "My pack sent me away." Her voice became smaller. "They said my wolf was too weak, and Willow Creek takes people nobody wants." The word struck a place in Claire that was still raw. She removed her own scarf and wrapped it gently around Molly's shoulders. "Willow Creek does not take people nobody wants," she said. "It welcomes people who deserve somewhere safe." Molly studied her with cautious blue eyes. "Are you going there too?" Claire glanced back toward the road she had traveled. Snow had already covered the wagon tracks, erasing the path behind her. "Yes," she answered. "I think I am." They reached Willow Creek shortly before sunset. It was smaller than Claire had imagined. No more than 30 cottages gathered around a weathered meeting hall. Smoke rose from uneven chimneys, and lanterns glowed behind frosted windows. Several residents hurried forward when they saw Molly. An older woman introduced herself as Mayor Helen Carter, then accepted the sealed letter Claire carried from Abigail. Helen read it beneath the nearest lantern, her expression changing as she reached the lines confirming Claire's training and 9 years of royal service. "We lost our only healer last spring," Helen said. "Most trained healers will not come this far." Claire looked at Molly, at the tired faces gathering around them, and at the empty cottage beside the meeting hall. For 9 years, every skill she possessed had belonged to one man. Now an entire town needed what she could give. "Then I will stay," Claire said. Far to the north, Blackwood Palace stood beneath the gathering moon, and for the first time in 9 years, Claire was not there to prepare the king's morning cup. The first full moon after Claire left rose red above Blackwood Palace, washing the snow-covered grounds in a dim copper glow. 3 days had passed, and Victoria Caldwell had arrived that morning with a formal escort, yet Ethan had barely noticed the ceremony at the gates. His attention kept returning to the untouched corner of his desk where Claire's cup had always waited before sunrise. The new healer used too much bitterroot. The servants allowed the fire to burn low. Council reports arrived out of order, and 2 letters requiring his signature had been placed beneath documents that could have waited a week. None of it should have mattered. Ethan had ruled through war, famine, and years of political unrest. He had never believed he depended on comfort. Still, the palace felt wrong without Claire, as though every room had shifted slightly while he slept. When the red moonlight reached the study windows, familiar pressure tightened behind his eyes. His wolf stirred beneath his skin, restless and confused. Ethan gripped the edge of the desk and forced himself to breathe slowly. Usually, Claire appeared before the pain fully began. She never asked whether he needed her. She simply knew. Tonight, no soft footsteps approached through the corridor. No porcelain cup warmed his hand. No calm voice reminded him to slow his breathing and focus on the fire. The pressure deepened, not dangerous, but disorienting enough to make the room feel distant. Ethan closed his eyes. One name rose from somewhere beneath thought. Claire. His wolf called for her again, not as a servant and not as a healer, but as if she were the only familiar star left in a winter sky. Ethan opened his eyes. The room smelled of old paper, smoke, and cold stone. Her scent was gone. He left the study without summoning his guards and crossed the palace alone. Every hallway seemed to hold a memory he had ignored. Claire kneeling beside a basket of herbs. Claire waiting outside the council chamber with corrected reports. Claire standing near the ballroom wall while others received praise for work she had quietly supported. He reached the servants' wing and stopped before her room. The door stood open. The shelves were bare. Ash rested in the fireplace, and a single blue ribbon lay beside the hearth. Ethan picked it up carefully. He did not know what it had once held together, but the sight of it filled him with a hollow dread. Abigail Moore appeared in the doorway behind him. "You should not be here," she said. Ethan turned. "Where did she keep my medicine?" Abigail's expression hardened. "You mean the medicine you never asked about? Where is it?" She studied him for a long moment, then crossed to the herb cabinet and pressed a hidden latch. A narrow door opened behind the shelves, revealing stone steps descending beneath the palace. Ethan followed her into a small underground room lined with glass bottles. Moonroot, silverleaf, wintertime, and dozens of rare ingredients filled the shelves. At the center stood a wooden table covered in faded notes. Every page carried his name. Ethan picked up the nearest journal. Dates stretched back 9 years. Each entry recorded his fevers, sleepless nights, and moments of weakness he had believed no one witnessed. Beside them were Claire's careful measurements and quiet observations. He turned another page, then another. The final entry had been written 4 nights earlier. Ethan read the last line once, then again, unable to move. "Each dose takes 1 day from my life." Ethan remained beneath the palace long after Abigail left him alone with Claire's journals. The underground room was cold, but warmth gathered at the back of his neck as he turned page after page. Every victory, he remembered, carried her handwriting. After the Frost War, when fever had kept him unconscious for 6 days, Claire had used a forbidden variation of moonroot to stabilize his wolf. The council report had credited Grant Mercer. After the Northern Plague, when Ethan believed his strength had returned through rest and discipline, Claire had written that she had transferred part of her own life energy into the medicine. 87 doses. 87 days taken from a future he had never thought to ask whether she wanted. Farther back, the numbers continued. A day here, 3 days there. Weeks surrendered quietly over 9 years until the total approached an entire year. She had given him mornings, seasons, and pieces of a life he had treated as endless. Abigail returned carrying a small lantern. Ethan looked up from the journal, and for the first time in years, the Alpha King did not know what to say. How much? He finally asked. Abigail understood. Nearly a year across those 9 years, including 87 days after the Frost War alone. The truth settled over him with unbearable clarity. Why did no one tell me? She tried. Abigail placed the lantern on the table. You were always leaving for another council meeting, another ceremony, another crisis. Grant told her that recognition would make the court question your strength. He said a king could not be seen depending on an omega. Ethan remembered Claire standing outside the council chamber with a folder pressed to her chest. He remembered telling her to leave the medical details with Grant. He remembered the disappointment in her eyes and how quickly she had hidden it. At the time, he had called her silence loyalty. Now he understood it had been resignation. He carried the journal upstairs and entered the council hall before dawn. Grant Mercer was already there, reviewing the final ceremony documents while Victoria Caldwell's delegation settled into the eastern wing. He smiled when Ethan approached. Your Majesty, the revised schedule is ready. Ethan placed Claire's journal on the table between them. Grant's smile disappeared. Explain this. For several seconds, only the clock above the chamber doors made a sound. Then Grant straightened his coat and recovered his composure. Miss Bennett assisted with some preliminary research. She created the remedy. She lacked the standing to present it. You took her work. Grant lowered his voice. I protected the throne. The court needed confidence in its king, not rumors that an unranked Omega kept him alive. Ethan stared at the man he had trusted for years. Anger rose inside him, but beneath it was something worse. Shame. Grant had lied, yet Ethan had accepted every explanation that preserved his pride. You were suspended from office pending a public inquiry, Ethan said. You will surrender all records related to Claire Bennett and Willow Creek. Grant's face paled. You cannot disgrace me over a servant. Ethan's voice became colder. Her name is Claire Bennett. He left the chamber before the argument could continue. By the time he returned to his study, dawn had begun to brighten the windows. He looked toward the empty place where her cup had always waited and finally understood that Claire had not abandoned him. He had failed to notice that she had been disappearing for years. Abigail found him there shortly afterward. You know where she went, Ethan said. Abigail did not answer immediately. If I tell you, will you order her back? Ethan closed the journal and looked at the brass key on his desk. No, I will ask whether she will speak to me. Only then did Abigail place the map to Willow Creek in his hand. By the time Ethan reached Willow Creek, the afternoon sky had turned the color of dull silver. His guards remained half a mile outside the settlement at his command, far enough to avoid frightening the residents, but close enough to satisfy the duties he could not simply abandon. Ethan entered alone, without a crown, royal carriage, or formal escort. Claire was standing near the meeting hall, showing Molly Hayes how to measure dried winter time into small paper packets. She sensed him before she saw him. Deep inside her, the wolf that had remained quiet for years stirred at the familiar weight of his presence. Claire steadied her breathing. Instinct was not trust, and longing was not forgiveness. Molly noticed the stranger first and moved closer to Claire. Who is he? She whispered. Claire turned. Ethan looked more tired than she had ever seen him. Snow clung to the shoulders of his dark wool coat, and there were faint shadows beneath his silver-gray eyes. He stopped several feet away, leaving the distance between them. Untouched. He is the Alpha King, Claire said. The square grew quiet as nearby residents recognized him. Mayor Helen Carter emerged from the meeting hall, but Claire lifted one hand, asking her to wait. This conversation belonged to Claire now. Why are you here? She asked. Ethan held Abigail's map at his side. I came to speak with you. Then speak. His gaze moved briefly over the clinic, the herb packets, and the people watching from nearby doorways. I read the journals. Claire's fingers tightened around the paper packet in her hand. Then you know what your recovery cost. I know what you gave. Those are not the same thing. Ethan accepted the correction without argument. Grant Mercer has been suspended. There will be a public inquiry, and your work will be restored to your name. Once, such words would have felt like justice. Now they sounded like another decision made far away from her. You traveled 20 miles to offer me recognition I should never have lost. Claire asked. No, his voice lowered. I came because the palace feels empty without you. The answer hurt more than she expected. Claire handed the packet to Molly and stepped forward. You do not miss me, Ethan. You miss the medicine, the reports, the fire kept warm, and the person who made your life easier without asking for anything. He did not deny it. At first, yes. The honesty stopped her. Then I began seeing every place where you had stood beside me while I looked past you. I remembered every time you tried to speak, and I chose something else. I do not know whether what I feel is enough to call love, but I know regret is not enough to ask you back. Claire searched his face for command, pride, or the quiet certainty that she would eventually obey. She found none. Ethan lowered himself into the snow before her. A soft murmur moved through the square. Stay, he said. Not because I am your king. Not because the palace needs you. Stay long enough for me to become someone you could freely choose. Tears warmed Claire's eyes, but she did not reach for him. Before she could answer, a rider entered Willow Creek carrying a sealed decree. The messenger dismounted and bowed. By emergency order of the Royal Council, this settlement will be placed under council control before sunset. The messenger's decree remained extended between them, its black wax seal gleaming beneath the pale afternoon light. Claire did not take it. Ethan rose from the snow and accepted the document instead, then broke the seal with one careful motion. His eyes moved quickly across the page. Claire watched the calm leave his face. Under an old emergency law, 5 council signatures could temporarily place an unregistered settlement under royal control until the king or a majority hearing overturned the order. The decree accused Willow Creek of sheltering unregistered omegas, practicing medicine without approval, and occupying land belonging to the crown. By sunset, council officers would be permitted to seize the clinic, its records, and every formula Claire had created since arriving. Who signed it? She asked. Ethan turned the document toward her. Grant Mercer's name appeared beneath those of 4 senior council members. A timestamp at the bottom showed the decree had been filed before dawn, less than an hour before Ethan suspended him from office. Grant had prepared his next move before anyone could expose him. If Claire's work could no longer remain hidden inside the palace, he intended to claim it through the law. This order was built on false information, Ethan said. The messenger shifted uneasily. Your Majesty, until a formal hearing reverses it, the council expects compliance. Claire read the accusations again. Anger moved through her, but it no longer felt wild or helpless. It sharpened her thoughts. Around the square, Willow Creek residents gathered closer. Molly stood beside Mayor Helen Carter, clutching a pouch of herbs against her chest. These people had spent years being told that their lives mattered only when someone stronger found them useful. Claire would not allow the palace to repeat that lesson. We have complete records, she said. Every patient, every treatment, every donation, and every acre transferred to the settlement. Nothing here is hidden. Ethan looked at her, waiting. He did not interrupt or offer to speak for her. Claire noticed the restraint, small but meaningful. What happens if we challenge it? She asked. The council must hold a hearing by noon tomorrow, he answered. You have the right to present evidence and witnesses. And if they try to keep our records sealed? Ethan removed the royal signet ring from his hand and placed it in her palm. The silver felt cold against her skin. This grants access to every office involved in the decree. No clerk may deny you a document. No council member may close the hearing. Claire stared at the ring. The brass key she had left behind had represented service. This represented authority, but she would not accept it without limits. I will lead the case, she said. Mayor Carter will speak for Willow Creek. Abigail Moore will testify about my medical work, and no one will describe these people as property of the crown. Agreed. Willow Creek will choose its own leaders. Write the terms. And you will listen before deciding. Ethan met her eyes. I will. Claire handed the decree back to the messenger. Tell the council that Willow Creek will appear at noon tomorrow. The messenger bowed and rode north. Mayor Carter stepped beside Claire as the hoofbeats faded. Can we truly challenge them? Claire closed her fingers around the signet. We are not asking permission to exist, she said. We are going to make them recognize that we already do. At noon the next day, Claire entered the royal council chamber wearing no servant's uniform and carrying no tray, medicine, or report for anyone else. She wore a simple silver-gray dress beneath her winter cloak, and Ethan's royal signet rested in her closed hand. Mayor Helen Carter walked beside her, while Molly Hayes and several residents of Willow Creek waited in the outer hall as witnesses. Abigail Moore stood near the council table with the original medical journals secured beneath one arm. Ethan remained beside the throne instead of sitting upon it. Grant Mercer stood across the chamber under the watch of two royal officers, no longer speaking as a minister but as the subject of the inquiry. The four council members who had signed the emergency decree watched Claire approach with guarded expressions. Grant recovered his composure first. This hearing concerns an unauthorized settlement and unlicensed medical practice, he said. It does not require a village healer to address the crown. Claire placed a thick ledger on the table between them. Then it should be easy for you to explain why your decree attempted to seize every formula I created. Silence moved through the chamber. Claire opened the ledger and read the dates, treatments, donations, and land agreements recorded in Willow Creek. Every page was orderly, witnessed, and lawful. Mayor Carter then presented the original deed proving the settlement had been granted to its residents 12 years earlier. The council had no legal claim to the land. Claire followed with copies of her moonroot research, including notes written years before Grant had presented the remedy as his own. Ethan did not interrupt. He had promised to listen, and this time he kept that promise. Grant dismissed the work as preliminary assistance, but Abigail stepped forward and described Claire's research, the life energy used in Ethan's treatment, and the instructions Grant had given to keep her name from the court. The room changed. Men who had once praised Grant now avoided his eyes. When he finally turned toward Ethan, his voice lost its practiced confidence. I did what was necessary to protect trust in the throne. Ethan stepped away from the throne and stood beside Claire. No, he said. You protected my pride, and I allowed you to do it. Every head lifted. Ethan faced the assembled council, his voice steady but stripped of ceremony. Claire Bennett saved my life, restored my strength, and gave this kingdom work for which others accepted praise. I failed to seek the truth because the lie was comfortable for me. Grant was formally removed from office, and the council ordered a full review of every medical claim he had submitted. Claire then presented Willow Creek's terms. The settlement would elect its own leaders, train healers regardless of rank, retain ownership of its records, and receive permanent protection from forced relocation. One council member objected that granting such rights to Omegas would disrupt tradition. Claire met his gaze. A tradition that survives only by keeping people powerless deserves to be disrupted. The vote passed decisively. Victoria Caldwell rose from among the noble observers, her expression composed. There should be no Luna ceremony tomorrow, she said. Not while another woman's sacrifice is still being uncovered. Ethan inclined his head. There will not be. When the chamber finally emptied, Claire remained beside the council table, looking at the signet in her palm. Ethan approached without guards or advisors. What must I do, he asked quietly, to deserve one more day beside you? Claire studied the man who had once believed authority could repair every wound. Then she reached for his hand, removed the royal ring from his finger, and held it between them. Come to Willow Creek for 30 days without using your title, your command, or your crown, she said. Listen before you decide. Ask before you act. When those 30 days are over, I will give you my answer. Ethan looked at the empty place on his hand, then back at her. I will come. Claire closed her fingers around the ring. Then come as Ethan Blackwood, not as the Alpha King. Claire kept the royal ring for 30 days. During that time, Ethan divided his days between the capital and Willow Creek, handling matters of state in the morning and returning to the settlement before sunset without a royal carriage, formal escort, or public ceremony. His guards remained beyond the southern ridge, close enough to fulfill their duty, but far enough that the village never felt occupied. In Willow Creek, no one bowed. Claire had made that condition clear, and Ethan respected it. At first, he seemed uncertain without commands to give or decisions to control. He carried medicine between cottages, repaired the meeting hall roof beside residents who had once feared speaking in his presence, and listened through every village meeting without interrupting. When Mayor Helen Carter disagreed with him, he did not invoke the throne. He asked her to explain. When Molly Hayes showed him how to sort wintertime from Silverleaf, he followed her instructions without correcting her. Slowly, Ethan began learning the details he had overlooked for years. Molly preferred honey in her tea. Helen had once taught history before her former pack dismissed her for defending an Omega student. Claire hummed while preparing medicine and touched her mother's silver pendant whenever she was worried. He discovered that she laughed when children mixed up herb names, disliked overly sweet bread, and always left the clinic window open an inch because the scent of smoke reminded her of the palace. These were small truths, but they told him more about Claire than 9 years of standing beside her had ever taught him. He did not ask when she would return. He did not speak of what the palace needed. Instead, he opened the Royal Academy to healers of every rank, established an independent council to review mistreatment of Omegas, and ordered that Willow Creek's legal protections be entered into permanent law. Each reform reflected Claire's recommendations, but Ethan never asked for gratitude. On the 30th evening, Claire found him outside the clinic, stacking firewood beneath a pale winter moon. Snow rested in his dark hair, and his hands were rough from work he could easily have assigned to someone else. She held out the royal ring. Ethan looked at it, but did not reach for it. "Have I learned enough?" he asked. "Enough to understand that the crown is not the man wearing it," Claire said. "But understanding is not the same as becoming. Then I will keep becoming." There was no performance in his voice, only quiet certainty. Claire placed the ring in his palm, but closed his fingers around it before he could put it on. "I will not return as your healer, your servant, or the woman who waits outside your door. I know. Willow Creek remains free, and its council answers to its people. It will. You will never use your rank, your wolf, or any bond between us to make choices for me." Ethan met her eyes. "Never." Claire's final condition was the hardest to speak. "You must love me as Claire Bennett, even on days when I do nothing for you." His expression softened. "Those are the days I hope to know you best." Something warm stirred inside her, not the desperate hope she had carried at 18, but something steady and free. Ethan lowered himself before her, not as a king making a declaration, but as a man offering a choice. "Will you stay?" Claire looked toward Willow Creek, where lanterns glowed behind frosted windows, then toward the distant palace lights beyond the trees. She no longer had to choose between love and herself. "I will stay," she said, placing her hand in his. "But I will never disappear for you again." Ethan rose and held her hand gently. "Then I will spend every day making certain you never have to." Beneath the winter moon, their bond awakened without command or ceremony. Claire stood beside him, not behind him, and for the first time, staying felt as free as leaving. Thank you so much for staying with us until the very end of this story. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What was your favorite moment, and what message or lesson did you take away from Claire and Ethan's journey? Share your opinion in the comments below and join the conversation with fellow story lovers. If you enjoyed this tale, please give the video a like, share it with your friends, and subscribe to Alpha's Regret Stories. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss our next exciting story filled with romance, drama, betrayal, and unforgettable twists. See you in the next story.